It was a quiet afternoon at a gas station on the outskirts of town. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot, when a woman, in her mid-50s, pulled up to the pump. Her grey hair was tied back loosely, and she wore simple, comfortable clothes, the kind of outfit that didn't attract much attention. She got out of her car with the calm, practiced movements of someone who's done this 1,000 times before. But today, something would be different. Today, a small unnoticed detail about her would turn this ordinary moment into something extraordinary. As she began filling up her car, a rumble grew louder in the distance, the sound of motorcycles. At first, it was just a hum, but it quickly turned into a roar as 3 bikers pulled up to the gas station, their engines revved aggressively, echoing off the nearby buildings. The men dismounted their bikes with the swagger of people who felt like they owned the place. Leather jackets, bandanas, the whole look. They weren't just here for gas. You could tell by the way they were scanning the area. They were looking for something, or someone, to mess with. Their eyes quickly locked onto the woman standing by her car. Unaware of the attention she was drawing, she was just minding her business, lost in the simple task of filling her tank. The bikers exchanged glances and grinned, the kind of grin that made your stomach turn. They started walking over, their heavy boots thudding against the pavement, each step filled with cocky confidence. One of the bikers, the tallest and clearly the leader, was the first to speak. "Hey lady, need a hand with that?" His voice oozed sarcasm. The other 2 laughed, encouraging his rude behavior. She looked up, startled but composed, and gave them a polite smile, the kind that says, "I'm not interested in trouble." But trouble wasn't going to let her off that easily. "You should be careful around here," the second biker added, circling around her car as if inspecting it. "Might not be safe for someone like you." Alone, the tension in the air thickened. The harmless gas station now felt more like a trap. But here's the thing. These bikers had no idea who they were dealing with. To them, she was just another woman to hassle, just someone to push around for fun. They didn't know that the woman standing in front of them had raised one of the most famous action stars in the world, someone who wouldn't take kindly to anyone messing with his family. As the bikers continued their taunts, the woman's calm demeanor didn't change. She stayed cool, almost too cool for someone in her situation. She knew something they didn't, something that was about to shift the entire situation. One of the bikers reached out, grabbing the handle of the pump from her hands. "Let me help you with that," he sneered, pulling it from her grip. For a split second, there was silence. Then, from the corner of the lot, the sound of a powerful engine filled the air. Different from the bikes these guys were riding, the bikers didn't notice at first, too caught up in their game, but the woman did. She looked up, her eyes narrowing just slightly. The camera catches the blur of a motorcycle speeding into the frame. This wasn't just any bike. Sleek, black, and fast. It cut through the parking lot like a bullet. The rider, dressed in all black, slowed down just enough to assess the situation. He removed his helmet, and for a moment, everything froze. The 3 bikers, who had been so sure of themselves just seconds ago, went silent as they realized who was sitting on that bike, staring them down. It was Keanu Reeves, the man who had starred in countless action films. Known for his calm intensity and fierce loyalty, was right there, and he wasn't happy. Keanu wasn't just some actor in their eyes anymore. He was the guy who could end this little game they were playing without breaking a sweat. But here's where things get interesting. Keanu didn't rush over. He didn't shout or threaten them. He just stood there, helmet under his arm, eyes locked on the men who had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The tension was unbearable. The bikers, who had been so bold, were now frozen in place, not sure what their next move should be. Should they laugh it off, try to play it cool, or should they run? Before anything could happen, the woman spoke up, her voice steady, with a hint of amusement. "You boys have no idea who you're dealing with, do you?" The bikers turned to look at her, still confused, but there was no time to process what was happening. The situation had flipped in an instant, and the suspense was thick enough to cut with a knife. What happens next? Well, let's just say things are about to take a turn none of these bikers saw coming, and that's where we'll leave it for now. Stick around to find out how this story unfolds. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. The three bikers, who just moments ago had been so full of arrogance, now stood frozen, unsure of what to do. They were looking back and forth between the woman and Keanu Reeves, still processing what was happening. It was clear they hadn't expected to find themselves in this situation. They certainly hadn't expected the quiet woman at the gas pump to have a connection like this. The woman, Keanu's mother, remained calm. She had seen her share of tough moments in life, raising her son through challenging times, always teaching him to be humble, kind, but also strong when necessary. She knew exactly what kind of man Keanu had grown up to be. Someone who wouldn't let people like these bikers intimidate anyone, especially his own family. But she didn't need Keanu to fight her battles. She had handled tough situations before, and she had the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. The bikers, though, weren't thinking that far ahead. They were still trying to process whether this was real or some bizarre coincidence. The tallest one, clearly the leader of the group, tried to shake off the unease creeping up his spine. He looked at Keanu, then back at his buddies, trying to maintain his bravado. "What? You think you're gonna save the day or something? Big shot," he sneered, though his voice wavered slightly. The other two bikers shifted uncomfortably, no longer as eager to back up their leader. Keanu said nothing at first. His silence was more powerful than any threat. He just stood there, his gaze never leaving the bikers. It was almost as if he was giving them a chance to make the right choice, to walk away from the mess they'd created. But the leader wasn't ready to back down, not yet. He felt his pride on the line, and he wasn't going to let this end without making some kind of stand. "I don't care who you are," the biker growled, taking a step toward Keanu. "You don't scare us. Right, boys?" He turned to his friends, but their enthusiasm had clearly waned. The other two didn't respond, their confidence shaken by the escalating situation. Meanwhile, the woman, Keanu's mother, watched quietly. She knew her son well, and she could sense what was about to happen. But she also knew this wasn't just about him stepping in to protect her. This moment was about more than just the confrontation between these bikers and a famous movie star. It was about the choices people make when they think no one's watching, and how easily those choices can change your life. Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You don't want to do this," he said, his eyes locked on the leader. "You have a chance to walk away right now." For a moment, there was silence. The leader hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. But pride is a powerful thing, and instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Or what?" he snapped, trying to regain control of the situation. "What's a Hollywood actor gonna do about it?" Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at his mother, giving her a small reassuring nod. She smiled back, a sign that she trusted him to handle things the right way. Then Keanu looked back at the bikers. "It's not about what I'm going to do," he said quietly. "It's about what you're going to choose to do next." There was something in his voice, something that made the bikers pause. It wasn't a threat, but it was enough to make them reconsider. The tension hung in the air, thick and heavy. As the leader weighed his options, he could feel the eyes of his friends on him, waiting to see what he would do. But just as the moment seemed to be tipping toward a resolution, something unexpected happened. A car pulled into the gas station, tires screeching as it came to a stop. The driver, an older man with a grizzled face, got out and shouted across the lot, "Hey, what's going on here?" The distraction broke the spell. The leader of the bikers glanced at the man, then back at Keanu. Unsure of how to react, his friends took the opportunity to slowly back away, clearly ready to be done with this whole situation. Keanu remained calm, but the moment was fragile. One wrong move, one misstep, and things could spiral out of control. The new arrival, a local gas station attendant, seemed oblivious to the tension, but his presence added another layer of unpredictability. Keanu's mother took a step forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Let's all calm down," she said, her tone gentle but commanding. "There's no need for any of this." The bikers looked at her, then at Keanu, and finally at each other. The leader clenched his fists, his pride warring with his common sense. But he could see the writing on the wall. This wasn't going to end well for him if he kept pushing. With a frustrated growl, he threw up his hands. "Fine, whatever. We're done here." The bikers turned and headed back to their motorcycles, their swagger gone. They revved their engines, but there was no bravado in the sound now, just the hum of retreat. As they sped off, the gas station seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Keanu watched them go, his expression unreadable. His mother walked over and put a hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said softly. He smiled down at her. "Always." But as they got ready to leave, the man who had pulled in moments earlier approached, curiosity in his eyes. "Was that really who I think it was?" he asked, glancing from Keanu to his mother. Keanu just smiled, putting his helmet back on. "Take care," he said, his voice light and kind, before revving his bike and heading off into the distance with his mother, leaving the mystery hanging in the air. But this wasn't the end. There were still unanswered questions, unresolved tensions. What would the bikers do next? Would they come back, angrier than ever? Or had they learned their lesson? And more importantly, what would happen when word spread about what had really happened at that gas station? As Keanu and his mother rode off into the distance, the tension seemed to have lifted, but it wasn't gone for good. The bikers, humiliated by the encounter, had more on their minds than just leaving it behind. After they drove off, they pulled into a quiet parking lot a few miles away, frustration simmering between them. The leader, still fuming from the way things had played out, paced back and forth, his fists clenched. "Can you believe that guy?" he spat, looking to his friends for validation. "He thinks just because he's some big-time actor, he can make us look like fools." His pride was clearly wounded. And while his two friends had lost most of their appetite for trouble, the leader wasn't ready to let it go. One of the other bikers, the one who had stayed quiet during the whole encounter, finally spoke up. "Man, maybe it's time we just leave it," he said, his voice calm but tired. "We got off easy. That could have gone way worse." But the leader wasn't ready to listen. He shook his head, still holding on to the anger. "No way, nobody embarrasses me like that. Not without payback." They all knew it was a bad idea, but the leader's pride was a stubborn thing. As they debated their next move, they didn't notice the car that had pulled up a little ways down the street, watching them from a distance. It was the same man from the gas station, the one who had interrupted things earlier. But now, he wasn't just a bystander. He had been listening to everything, piecing together the situation, and now he was watching carefully, like someone who knew more than he let on. Meanwhile, Keanu and his mother were back home, thinking the whole ordeal was behind them. They sat in the backyard, enjoying a quiet evening, their bond clear in the easy conversation they shared. Keanu had always been protective of his family, and his mother had always taught him to stay grounded, no matter how famous he became. The events of the day had only reinforced how important that was. But later that night, Keanu's phone rang. It was the man from the gas station, the one who had pulled in at the last minute. "Listen," the man said, his voice low and serious. "I don't know if those bikers are done. I overheard them talking, and it sounds like they're planning something. You might want to be ready, just in case." Keanu's face hardened. He thanked the man for the warning and hung up, his mind racing. The last thing he wanted was for his mother to be in any more danger. But Keanu wasn't the type to panic. He had dealt with situations like this in movies. Sure, but he knew that real life required a different approach. The next day, Keanu decided to handle things in a way that wasn't about violence or revenge, but about ending the cycle before it spiraled out of control. He made a few calls, reaching out to a local organization that worked with troubled youth, some of whom had been part of biker gangs or had lived on the edge of the law. He explained the situation and asked if they could arrange a conversation. Not a confrontation, but a way to turn things around. The bikers, meanwhile, were still stewing over their next move. But just before they could act, they were approached by someone unexpected, an older man from the organization Keanu had contacted. He wasn't there to intimidate them, but to offer them something different, a way out, a chance to talk things through, to see the bigger picture before things got worse. At first, the bikers were suspicious. They didn't trust outsiders, especially not after what had happened. But something about the way the man spoke, calm and without judgment, made them listen. He told them that continuing down this path would only lead to trouble, real trouble, and that they had a chance to walk away with their heads held high, rather than being dragged down by their own pride. Surprisingly, it worked. The leader, still angry but now seeing the bigger picture, realized this wasn't worth it. Keanu hadn't fought them, hadn't humiliated them in front of anyone. He had just stood his ground. There was no win in taking this further. After a long silence, the leader nodded, the fire in his eyes finally dimming. "Maybe it's time. We move on," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of that decision. The conflict ended, not with a dramatic showdown, but with a choice. One that changed the direction of their lives. They weren't ready to admit it then, but the bikers knew they had gotten lucky. They had come close to something much worse. And thanks to Keanu's approach, they were given the chance to choose differently. In the days that followed, Keanu received a quiet thank you from the man who had mediated the situation. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a simple acknowledgement that sometimes the strongest action is knowing when not to fight. Keanu didn't need the recognition though. For him, it wasn't about being a hero or making a statement. It was about protecting the people he cared about and setting an example of how strength can come in many forms. As for the bikers, they disappeared from the scene, never returning, to cause trouble again. They had learned their lesson, though it took them some time to admit it. And while Keanu and his mother went back to their normal lives, the events of that day stayed with them. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful actions are the ones that don't make the headlines, but change lives in quieter ways. The gas station incident became a story that spread through whispers, retold by those who had heard pieces of it. But no one really knew all the details, and that's how Keanu preferred it. letting his actions speak for themselves, without the need for attention or fame, just a quiet strength in a world that often forgets what that truly means. And so, the story ends not with a bang, but with a lesson, a reminder that sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do.